There's always financial incentive at the bottom line of a lot of these cultural misnomers, or I think in regards to giving up our power and kind of outsourcing our intuition and decision making. And so, anytime that there was a large incentive for someone to sell something that may have a negative effect, it would always behoove them to make sure that people weren't paying attention to that. And so, on a larger scale, when it comes to something like a pesticide, like glyphosate, I think these industries are very well practiced in sweeping things under the rug, for lack of a better term, in terms of data and the potential harm. And so we have this lack of what's known as precautionary principle, which is, if you don't know the impact that it's going to have, we probably shouldn't be rushing into something on a massive scale. Because if there's even a small chance that it has irreparable damage, then we have gone in blind to, in the case of glyphosate, we used it so much, and it is effective for what it does, which is to basically end life. It kills everything.
Just
And
kills
so
everything.
so the idea of genetically modifying our food was a great idea to sell this toxic poison, because if you genetically engineer the food to withstand that poison, as we've seen with some of these GMO, these genetically modified organisms, you can spray the heck out of your whole field with this toxic chemical known as glyphosate, or using the product Roundup, originally sold by Monsanto. Now Bayer has purchased that company. You can withstand the endless amounts of that poison, seemingly. So from a business standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Kill all the weeds, kill everything that you're not going to make money off of, but your crop still stands strong. Unfortunately, there's the downstream effect, both literally and figuratively. And so we've eroded the life in the soil. And this is a big part of what the Need to Grow is about, was the biology, the microbiology. And so I think, to answer your question, is if there's a potential negative effect of a product, you don't really want people to know about that. And so these marketing strategies, some people call it propaganda, but it's also just the actual act of lobbying. You can educate or miseducate your influencers, which are often politicians, but it's also farmers, it's also consumers, to kind of look the other way. And you can convince them that this is for the greater good, that we have to use these products, right? So a lot of farmers that are really well-meaning were lured into using poisonous chemicals. And a lot of farmers now that probably don't want to use these chemicals are actually trapped in a loop where they can't actually change their farming methods unless they were to have outside support. And so it's really hard to change from a conventional farm into organic. And a lot of great organizations are now trying to find funding to help them transition, because initially it does take a bit of extra funding over usually about 2 to 3 years. In many cases, they do make a bigger ROI by switching to organic. They have fewer inputs, they have fewer water inputs, they don't have to use those toxic chemicals, and they start to see the ecosystem taking care of itself. And that's what nature was designed to do. And so anytime that we interrupt natural systems, there is an inevitable kicking the can down the road. We think we're getting a solution here, but it will probably come back to bite us in the butt. And so when we look at soil, we extract. We have to think about farming as extraction from the minerals and the nutrients in our soils. And that's important. We need to be eating food, but we forgot to replenish those soil systems, is a way to think about it. So we're growing these silhouettes of crops of what they once were, where they don't contain the magnesium, they don't contain the vitamins and minerals that they once did. And so we're eating them, but we're not getting that nutrition that even just a couple of generations ago we would have had. So why is that? Well, the nutrients just aren't there in the soil. That biology in that ecosystem, which is so complex, even the top soil scientists will admit we know maybe 1% of what's going on. It's tens of thousands of different species in just billions of microbes in just a teaspoon of soil. And so it's kind of hard for our brain to grasp, which makes sense as to why we would overlook it. It's the invisible. It's but we really do know more about the cosmos at this point than we do about our own soil. And so we want to inspire people to, not just look up at the night sky and think, hey, I want to be an astronaut, but actually look down and go, the opposite direction into the minuscule, and think, wait a minute, there's a galaxy happening in this handful of soil. And really all of life on planet Earth is dependent on this. And so we need more people to be excited and inspired by that, because without soil being protected, you eventually run out of the nutrients for the food, but also we're losing the ability to hold water. And so much of our ecosystem is dependent on the hydration cycle. And when soil is healthy, when it has those microbes, when it has that biodiversity, soils are actually going to hold water. They act like a sponge. So when we deplete that life in the soil, we're actually increasing both drought and flood potential, because the water isn't being absorbed into it. And so therefore you drive through California, where I lived for a long time, and you see just the massive drought. And that's because these soils are bare. They're being just exhausted by over extraction, and they're not being covered in the way that nature would do it. Nature wouldn't just leave bare soil. There's always plants, there's always biodiversity. And so that actually protects and holds the water down there. So we see that if we increase the soil life by as little as 1 percentage point, it's organic matter on an acre, you could hold about 25,000 more gallons of water. So we can
Wow.
dramatically restore the water cycle by focusing on soil. Almost everything comes back to soil.